Hello, listeners. This is Dwayne Deason. I am the host of the Cost Management Center podcast. Today, we're going to be discussing cloud computing costs, a major area that has emerged in the last couple of decades. It was almost non-existent before that, and now it is a significant cost to most companies. And with us today, we have a special guest, Brian Kathman. He is the CEO of OpsCanvas. He is an expert in this field. And Brian, welcome.
Thanks, Dwayne. Glad to be here.
Yeah, good. Brian, I always like to start with just a little bit about background of your career, and then the company that you're working with, and how it got into this business.
My background is I guess what you would call a serial entrepreneur. I've been in software most of my career. Started my first company actually in the late 90s. Experienced the .com crash, so company didn't really go too far. But most of my career, I've been trying to identify problems that are out there in the world that no one's really seemed to be able to solve, and come up with a novel way to solve it, and overall have been pretty successful doing that. With my current company, OpsCanvas, we're really focused on cloud and cloud cost. It's a really complicated area that for all of the positives and benefits that we all experience by using software on our phone or on our laptop and websites, all that is really being powered by the cloud. And the challenge has been that the cloud is kind of, as we like to think of it, it's sprawled. It's really kind of just grown in all sorts of different ways and places that we didn't anticipate. And so what comes with sprawl oftentimes is a lot of complexity, as well as a lot of cost. And so at the heart of that problem is the fact that companies who kind of had this promise of the cloud, that they could go and move all their software from on their premise and running it, in their own facilities, and have someone else host it, that it would be a cost saver and easier for them to run their business. And a lot of them are now kind of second guessing that and wondering if maybe the cloud wasn't the promise that it meant to be. And really our design as a company is to help them solve that cost problem so that the cloud can continue to benefit them and actually be a cheaper, better, faster, more reliable solution in the long run.
Thank you for that background, and we're going to dig into that solution in a little bit here. But first, I want to give a little bit of the background to this cost area, and I'll start with a sad story. This is my experience with cloud computing, because we had a very good relationship back 15, 20 years ago when cloud computing first came out. The ROI versus on-premise equipment was strong. And it was mainly AWS back then. And every quarter, I would get a notice from AWS that they were dropping their costs. No other vendor sent me a notice like that. In fact, I'd bring it out to other vendors and say, send me something like this. Because and I went to their reInvent one year, and every course I attended there, every session was how to reduce the cost of the very company sponsoring the event, how to reduce their own costs. And so I thought it was a pretty good relationship. And then over time, I found they were taking more than they were given. They slowly but surely, they became a monster. They were a relatively small cost when we got started, and it made a lot of sense. And over time, it's become a primary cost for many, many companies. And that's even with other players coming on board that put cost pressures on there. But I start to wonder, were we better off with on-premise equipment or not? And I can't believe we're not. But with the amount of money we're spending per year on that, it's hard to, it's big money.
It is. And I think actually what part of what's shining a brighter light on this challenge today is the advent and rise of AI, because AI has data center costs that are significantly greater than just normal cloud computing. And there's all sorts of reasons why that should be kind of hosted in a data center. You don't want to have to deal with that, but it's adding more cost to the whole cloud experience. And so to your point, I think in some ways, I know we're at an inflection point with AI for a lot of reasons, kind of, the next wave of technology. But I think when it gets to the cost of running and managing technology, in the cloud in particular, I think AI is kind of also an inflection point for that.
It's a great point. That's changing significantly. Now, but I think of the big players here, and there's a lot of players, but really focus on AWS, Azure, Google as really the major players here. Is there really that much of a difference between them and the service they offer? Because I had a CIO on a few episodes ago that basically said that it's very difficult to have more than one of those platforms in your tech stack, because you become a specialist in that particular one. And so it somewhat seems like not all cloud services are the same, but they seem like they offer the same type of service.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I could probably spend the rest of the podcast talking about all of this, because it gets pretty complicated in terms of not just what they're offering, but like the strategy as a business. I think at a real high level for the audience that you have and thinking about it, there's not much of a difference. I mean, I think the costs kind of by and large are similar. What you're getting from them, hosting your software and making sure it's running, are pretty similar. I think what really winds up being the big difference from what our experience is that, one, to your point, you really do need a different team or a different engineer that is working depending on the cloud that you have. Now, engineers can certainly learn new products, learn new languages. They can also learn new clouds, but it's a learning curve. So if someone has worked always with AWS and then all of a sudden you decide to move to Azure, that's going to be a learning curve for them. You may end up just needing to hire different people. So really the cloud does have that sort of an impact where it is a specialty. The other thing that is important, and this is maybe more of a engineer perspective, but the tooling and the offerings from cloud to cloud are pretty different. What you're getting as a business is probably going to feel the same, but how they actually use it and how easy or hard it is can be very different. So we work with AWS and Azure, and we're in the process of adding Google as well. Those are the three main ones, as you mentioned. And there's a real big difference between the sort of tooling and visibility and just ease of use between AWS and Azure. I mean, I think generally in the market, AWS gets a lot of the love and praise because it is, in a lot of ways, more robust, easier to use than the others. But that's, from a business standpoint, you're not necessarily trying to make that decision. You're probably making a decision on cost and maybe some other factors. The last thing I'll add, and you mentioned that it's kind of you choose one or the other, and I think early on that was true. What's happening now, though, within particularly the larger enterprise market, is most organizations are trying to have at least two, and probably also on-prem. And the reason for that is it's strategic. They don't want to be taken advantage of in terms of their pricing. They don't want to kind of be caught in a corner where, say, one of the providers starts really degrading their service levels and you kind of feel stuck and it's going to take you 5 years to migrate. So strategically speaking, a lot of large clouds or a lot of large companies are trying to have multiple clouds, and that creates an additional cost as well. And if you have on-prem, that is, one more thing to add to the mix. So I do think that that's important. It also creates an opportunity for companies like ours and Wiz, which some people have probably heard about in the security space, where large enterprises want to have tooling, third-party software that's going to be able to see across all those clouds, see across everything, because a lot of times what you end up getting, certainly within the AWS or Azure consoles, as they say, within their own sort of tooling, you're only going to see their cloud. So if you're using multiple clouds, you're going to wind up having to use some other software. You might anyways, because it's just what the providers have is kind of bare minimum, whereas what companies like ours and others build is trying to enhance the experience.
That makes a lot of sense, that you can essentially offer them the ability to be transparent, that they're using multiple tools, but they're getting all the information back within a single application to let them manage it better and more efficiently.
Exactly.
I see a lot of value in that. Now, there's so many data centers going up. I live up in Northern Virginia here, and every time I turn a corner, it seems like there's a new data center that's popped up. Do you think that there's a chance for like the dark fiber experience back from a couple decades ago, where almost too much capacity is built, or is it just seem like an endless need right now and with nothing slowing down?
I think it kind of goes back to the points that we were talking earlier about AI, and I think a lot of that data center development is certainly being driven by the compute needs of AI models and using those models for sure. I don't think that, in terms of extra capacity for general cloud, I don't see that. I think they kind of know that business pretty well and they can predict it. So general cloud is probably going to be pretty consistently building the sort of capacity they need. And I can't imagine that we're going to all of a sudden have that massive extra capacity. But the one scenario that would create that is if, as a lot of people talk, that there's an AI bubble and then all of a sudden the AI business model doesn't play out and you've got, 50 data centers out by you that are now kind of no longer needing to use as much of it. And they'll either, stop using them, turn them off basically because it costs money to run them, or maybe they move it over to more general cloud computing purposes, which that could benefit everyone. If there was extra capacity, maybe it does drive the price down. I'm not as familiar with the fiber kind of overcapacity, which I'm sure there's a lot of lessons there, but I think that that's a very real scenario because of AI, and that would be the sort of factor I think that is influencing that.
Yeah, but that's a very good point. Like dark fiber, it really wasn't that much cost to maintain, and so you had that price advantage on to have plenty of fiber if you needed it. But if people, you're right, to operate a data center, you need a lot of energy, and so it becomes more efficient just to shut those down and restart them as you need the capacity. So that's a interesting perspective. So how have companies been managing the costs? Back in my day, when I went to reInvent, there was a handful of companies that offer some sort of solution because really AWS didn't have very many good tools built in. I think that's grown over time, both the quantity of vendors that do that type of work, both AWS and a lot of the other providers provide tools within their applications. When you go into a company, what are you usually seeing as what their existing efforts look like?
I think for companies, there's always somewhat of an evolution because whenever someone comes onto the cloud, they start either building or adding kind of over time. And so that continues to grow. And I think that evolution is initially you feel like the AWS bill itself and the tooling around the bill that you can get online is enough. You've got, okay, I spent $40,000 this month and let me see how I spent it. The problem that where an organization outgrows that is one, the list of things that you're spending money on can grow very fast. But secondarily, you start to see that the bill keeps growing, even if you feel like your software team is not building anything new. And so you start wondering, like, why is this continuing to go up? The problem with the bill is that it's really like a grocery list. That's the way I think of it. Is Amazon's a grocery store for cloud computing tools and capacity, and you're buying different pieces, databases and different managed services and whatever you might need. And so you're going to see a list just like you got a receipt at the grocery store. And, it doesn't necessarily tell you everything you need to know. Certainly, it's not going to tell you if you are buying things that you no longer need. So I keep buying milk, but, I've got all this expired milk in my fridge or whatever it might be. And so companies have started to migrate. I'd say over the last 10 years, there's really been kind of the emergence of a new sort of industry or category, which is FinOps, which a lot of your listeners might be familiar with. But that's basically a software company, probably some of the ones you're referencing, that come in and they'll take that bill or that receipt that you have and try and make sense of it, right? Try and help you understand, what does this look like this month versus last month or 6 months ago, and maybe you start to see some trends. And so these FinOps companies have tools to do that sort of thing. They might also look at things like, how much is a database being used, and if it's not being used very much, they might say, hey, you should look at removing this. And so the evolution of the tooling is really kind of gone outside of the cloud providers themselves. I mean, AWS and Azure and GCP, they all have things like one or two cost management tools that'll kind of help you a little bit with some of these, things. But the more you keep growing, and the bill's going up 2-3% every month, and you start to wonder, okay, what else do I need? Most of these companies are turning to FinOps tools to try and solve that. Now, interestingly enough, and I won't get into all of what we do yet, but I think what's interesting is what we see. You wouldn't think in this day and age that you've got CTOs and CFOs that are trying to reconcile their cloud bill with Excel, but that is happening very regularly. More often than not, actually, I would say.
Wow.
And it sounds odd. Now, some companies, it's probably just a plain old Excel spreadsheet, but I know companies where they've built all these macros and programmed their Excel spreadsheet to be able to kind of sift through and diagnose problems, trends, everything else that might be happening there.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think that I kind of put it in two categories. One is there was always a governance issue, meaning who could sign up and get them in the door. And what AWS made it so convenient, all the cloud providers, to add service was you could do that with a blink of an eye. And if you weren't careful and had strong governance on it, before you know, there was a lot of eyes blinking, and you had a lot of excess service, and then became, I think, where we're going to go to a little bit of the monitoring aspect of it.
Right.
So, but before we go into the monitoring aspect of it, maybe a little bit is the governance. Is that something that you tackle, or is that really for companies to make sure that that they handle themselves?
Yeah. So, I mean, governance has a lot of different aspects to it. Governance can cover everything from what sort of rights do I have as someone that has an account, say in AWS or Azure or whatnot. Am I an administrator? Can I do anything? Can I add new resources, or am I just simply a user, or what third party maybe has access and rights to do certain things? And so that's one part of it, as well as like within. It's not just within the account, but maybe within a certain application that the team's building, certain people that are working on it would have more rights than maybe those that are working on a different project. But where it becomes, I think, a little bit of a challenge, and there are companies out there that all they do is kind of help manage governance, is there's kind of like an all or nothing approach oftentimes, meaning I'm a team trying to get things done. I trust my team. So anyone that needs to add things, I'm going to let them do that. And then we'll they just need to let me know, or whatever it is, or I'll see it on the bill. And that sort of an approach is for speed. But oftentimes I think with all the best of intentions, things get missed, things get deployed and never turned down, or oftentimes you're testing new ways to do things or new kind of third-party products or managed services. You're not sure if you're going to use them, but you didn't realize that you had to actually go through a whole extra step to turn it off. And so governance can kind of create that problem of leading to the cost. At the flip side is that's the nothing on the governance side. On the governance side is it can end up being like a real sort of impediment and headache. And there's no doubt that you've got people in the company frustrated that something didn't get, deployed or pushed out the door, but it's because you've got all these hoops and processes and approvals to go through just to get, this thing tested or whatever it might be. So there's not really a good, easy answer on that, but I do think that some of the basic tooling is there, but I'd say it's just generally, it's very inconsistent in how it's used, not only company to company, but even within companies.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense there. And that's a challenge that I've run into, where most of the time the problem started with poor governance. And because of that, they had a lot of problems. It usually wasn't, hey, all we need to do is tweak one or two instances that are causing the issue. It's the death by 1,000 cuts, which is why it's like FinOps solutions like what you have make a lot of sense, because when you're trying to address those 1,000 different issues, you need some sort of tool to help you do that. And my guess is Microsoft Excel is not going to do that. So let's start getting into a little bit about your solution and how it works, and how it's a little different from competitors, and what your results have been.
Yeah. So, I mean, so our approach is a little bit different than I think a typical cost management or FinOps solution. in that, we didn't start trying to solve the cost problem. We started trying to solve the efficiency problem, which is also another issue because what we didn't cover and we didn't talk about, and we could probably have a whole, separate podcast on, is all the other costs related to running software in the cloud that aren't just your AWS bill, right? You've got a big team. You're going to have specialized engineers, as we talked about. You're going to have a lot of other costs and elements. And so the bill itself, while a big part of that, doesn't necessarily tell the whole story. And so we started kind of more on the efficiency of how do you get things deployed to the cloud more quickly? How can you take something that oftentimes getting like a new product deployed or setting up a new environment, which an environment is basically an instance of a product. Like you might have a testing environment and a development environment, and then a production environment, which is where it actually lives and your users use it. But you have all the other ones because you're building it, testing it, demoing it, whatever you might do. So you got different versions of the same product running in all these places. And that becomes very time intensive. And we had seen this as a real opportunity for AI and automation. How do we get things, off of laptops and workstations where your engineers are building it and actually running in the cloud without, right now you got to oftentimes have to write code, or you got to click through the console and spend hours trying to get it configured for use. And so that might be a, multi-week, certainly multi-day project. And we were trying to turn that into a multi-minute project. So have that happen in less than 30 minutes. What we realized was that the cost piece is actually very much a part of the equation as well. It's not just how efficiently can I get it deployed, but when I deploy it, is it going to be structured in a way that I can afford to run it? Is it when I get a test environment running, how do I make sure that we're not continuing to spend money on it after it's been tested, that it actually gets shut down? So there's a lot of things that start to come into the cost. And so the real sort of breakthrough that we feel like we're bringing to the table is that by looking at FinOps and cost management, not just through your bill, which is where all these tools, they try and analyze your bill and just make you help you to spend less, which is a very valid approach. We just think it's only half of the equation. So the other part of the equation is what's actually running and how does it relate? And that's important because you then can know if you have things on your bill that are no longer running, you should stop paying for them. You can turn those off. We call this context. So what is the context of the resources or the line items in your bill? Is it an active software that's running? Is it part of your production or your kind of your core, business software? Is it maybe what we call a lower environment like testing or developer environment, in which case maybe I can turn it off more quickly? So the context is really important when you look at the bill to try and identify waste and other things. The other thing that's really important, though, is context is really important for budgeting, right? And this is something that your audience probably knows all too well. This is, I think, one of the big drivers of those Excel spreadsheets that I was talking about is that right now, when I try and figure out how to break up my bill, how do I do it? Like, I don't really know, certainly not as a finance person. I don't know, if I'm spending $100,000 on this bill and I have 3 products that we're running or 3 pieces of software that we're running, maybe one's our product and 2 are some back office systems. I don't know how to divide that up. And for accounting and budgeting purposes, I kind of want to know that, right? And so if it doesn't tell me on the bill, where else would it tell me? And so what organizations have tried to do is they've said, okay, we're going to help you define where those expenses all go, because we're going to take every resource that's running your cloud and we're going to put a tag on it. So this tag is for the CRM, this tag is for payroll, and this tag is for our, online shop. And then you apply the tags to all the resources, and then voila, you can run a report and you can know the context, right, of what you're running. The challenge with that and where we come in is that we've realized, and I think most organizations that try and do tagging realize that it's really, really hard. It's really expensive to set up, and then it's really hard to maintain. The reason being, every time I deploy new software, I got to remember to put a tag on each one of those things I'm deploying. And if I don't do it and I miss, say, 10 of them, now my source of truth, my record of what goes where starts to diminish. And all of a sudden I have not as much information as I need. And so what that ultimately means is that I'm trying to make decisions with partial information. I'm starting to try and guess. I still need to know, but I don't necessarily know that. And so what OpsCanvas has done, and where we've really, we feel kind of breaking through this barrier and this problem, is we are combining the data sets of everything that you're running and deploying. There's what's called a CI/CD pipeline of deployments. So I can capture all the information about what goes with what. So I know up front that, these 100 things go with my online market. These 50 things go with my payroll system, and I can start to sort that out. And then we correlate all of that with the cloud bill itself. And now we have context, cost, and metadata on everything that's happening. And the reason that's important is I didn't have to tag, but I can budget automatically. I didn't have to try and understand what on my bill we're actually using, because the context already knows that. So now I can look at my bill and I can say, okay, these 30 things aren't even being used. Why do I have them? And you can start to really whittle it down. So that, I think is really what is one of the big challenges. There's a lot of challenges with growing cost in the cloud, but I think the biggest problem we see is that you have two different teams. You have your, FinOps team and your DevOps team with two different, databases and two different processes, and they're both kind of doing their job, but the decisions that need to be made need to be a combination of the two. And that context or that correlation is really critical to solving the problem.
This is very helpful. What pops in my head is that context as soon as really it's a little bit about accountability, because essentially you said, hey, here's what's happening. Here are the owners.
Right.
Why is that? Are you going to allow that to happen? And how are we going to control that? Because I think up to that point, not having that ownership allows people not necessarily to address the issue as much. It's a kind of a common issue.
Yeah.
But when you walk in the door, because this sounds like it sounds to me like this could be an incredibly complex and long process. How are you able to, what would be, they're spending $20-30 million on cloud services. How could you do that timely? Is this a months long process, or is this much faster to come up with information that is actionable?
Well, I mean, I think what you find is most everyone hasn't really been able to solve this problem for a lot of reasons. One of them is because it does take a long time. Because not for us, and I'll get to how long it takes us, but for the average way to try and solve this and match everything up, you're probably going through a process, maybe even with a service provider that's trying to, whittle through everything and what's tagged, what's not. Let me figure out where everything goes. And you get to a result, a couple, 2-3 months down the road. And now all of a sudden you're like, wait, is this even, how accurate is this? Because it's 3 months potentially old. Right. So that is a big problem. I think one of our big emphases as a business has been on time to value. And I think that, one of the hard things when you're trying to solve a problem that if you don't solve it, it just keeps going on and getting more and more expensive and maybe, growing. So like if you don't solve the waste in your cloud this month, then you're going to keep paying for it for every month until you solve it, right? Yes. It becomes a very expensive problem. So we really have emphasized and focused on time to value, meaning how can you deliver the value of, this context and everything quickly so that people can take advantage of it quickly and get the savings quickly. The way we do that is we've kind of taken some approaches to actually integrate our software in like 10 minutes. So on the cloud account side, and then also on the DevOps or the CI/CD side, we integrate very quickly in both cases. They're two separate integrations because remember, there are two systems. And then we aggregate all that data into our system. And we do that quickly because now you need to make a decision. And making a decision as a company can take a long time, especially if you don't have all the evidence and proof and justification. So by getting that information quickly, identifying what your ROI is very quickly. You can make a decision quickly, and therefore the amount you can save or the business case for what you're doing is going to be that much better.
So you're feeding actionable data within, I'm hearing like hours, but I'm thinking days, but you're saying within hours, you're feeding actionable data.
Yeah. So the way our system works is the cloud account, we have a product called Zombie Scan. And basically what it's going to do is it's going to hook into your cloud account or accounts. And most organizations, large organizations in particular, are going to have tens, if not hundreds of different cloud accounts and sub accounts. Oftentimes those are set up particularly because they don't want to use tagging. They want to put things into the accounts that go with the business units, right? But so we go through the process of plugging in there, and then we're aggregating 19 different sort of reports and systems into one point of view of your cloud account that's deeper and richer than what you would get on your bill for sure. But everything like who created that resource, when was it last accessed, what sort of activities on it, what's it been doing over the last week or the last month, all that sort of stuff we gather. And those reports run, kind of on a daily basis. So within a day, we know everything about your account, and our algorithm can identify, okay, here's the waste in there that you might have. And then on the pipeline side, we plug into your CI/CD pipelines, which are tools like GitLab, GitHub, Bitbucket. And that allows us, as things are happening, we're capturing that information and we're able to pull that in as well. So now, and that happens more or less real time. So everything's always kept up to date. And when it gets correlated, we see all that information. Yeah, within a day or two, you're already kind of being able to make decisions and take action.
Wow, that's fantastic there. And is your model a subscription type of model, or and what target savings level, or is there even do most clients receive after and over what period of time?
So the good news that that people are spending a lot on cloud is that there's a lot to save. So
right.
It doesn't mean that that necessarily as a percentage everyone's wasting a whole lot of money, but what we found is that organizations, Gartner has done research on this. They estimate about 30% of the average company's cloud bill is being spent on unused or resources, or we call it waste, zombies. Mm-hmm. It's a pretty high number. I mean, that's significant. We've been able to validate that to some degree. We find on average about 22% of accounts have what we would term as likely zombies. We have an extra step in the process where we can actually narrow that down even more. And that's where you integrate with this, with the actual deployments themselves, like I was describing earlier. And when that all comes together, we're actually able to give you a much more specific number. It's actually going to be lower than 18% when we're all said and done, because we're removing what we call false positives. And the false positives are things that a normal FinOps tool or normal analysis of your cloud account would identify, and then your team would have to go through and pull those out. And that can take a long time. Why are they false positive? They're false positive because they're in your account, and their way that they're being used looks like they're not active. But in reality, they're backup systems, right? Or they're spot instances, or there's some other anomaly that's going on in your deployment process or in the usage of that software that we can identify, whereas others wouldn't be able to. So we go and we are able to bring that down. So, all in all, I think from a savings standpoint or how someone can kind of get benefit out of this is that, I think you're certainly looking at probably 10% is a pretty, reasonable target of and you might be able to reduce your cloud bill by more than that. There's also about 1% to 3% growth in cloud waste every month on average. And it kind of depends on the maturity of the organization, how well they're implementing governance, to your point earlier. All these other factors can influence it from it being, 0.5% or 1% to being 3 or 4 or 5%. But that's also something that once you kind of have a system in place to identify, you can identify it before it starts costing you. And so that's a huge savings. The other thing that I think was kind of is surprising to a lot of people, but probably not those that are writing checks to pay for the services to do it, is that tagging is actually very expensive. So, an average organization, an average enterprise probably has between 100,000 and 300,000 cloud resources or items that they have that they would want to tag. What general estimates are, because oftentimes your team's not going to have time to do that. And it's not something that's easy. You can't really have a tool do it because you don't necessarily know what type of resource or where it goes with in the status of the tagging process. So they'll often hire a service provider or someone to do that. And the approximate number, and this might be a little high, maybe even a little low, is about $10 per resource to implement and about $1 per resource to maintain. And so the maintenance is not that you're going around to every resource and like re-tagging it. It's just that you're making sure that you have a process to checks and balances that as new things are put into your cloud, that they're being tagged properly and that you're checking all of that. And the implementation initially is obviously you've got to go through, set up a tagging structure, and then actually implement it in that whole process. So you're talking about millions of dollars in setup for a large organization, hundreds of thousands probably to maintain it. So that's not insignificant. And that's something that we kind of like to say our product is no tagging required. So that whole process, that whole cost just isn't even there, which is great. So really, I think, I hope I'm answering your question, but from a ROI or that sort of standpoint, I think that, we see that organizations can generate an ROI as high as like 15x. I mean, something crazy like that, but certainly, it's a, 3 to 5x on a kind of just a, average day.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I mean, 10% savings off the bill is millions for most. Then you add to it really those secondary support costs that you're talking about, whether it's tagging, whether it's engineering resources and all those other type of support costs, because you can reallocate those resources to other functions in order to create efficiencies, or you can trim there as well if a company's inclined to do so.
That's all important. And I think I get really nerdy getting into the details of how our technology is so cool and different and breakthrough and whatever, and all this money that can be saved, all those things. But honestly, there's an emotional part to all of this that we see time and time again. And I really think at the end of the day, it's a lot of what we're trying to help alleviate is the anxiety, the kind of cloud bill anxiety. I don't know what I'm spending my money on. Mm-hmm. I don't know why it keeps going up. I don't really understand this. This is a huge part of my, operating expense, and I don't understand it like I feel like I should. And that really is the emotional part of all of this. And the way we solve that is, we talk about all the different ways we can help kind of identify waste and organize budget and all that. But really, it's about visibility and a sense of control. Like, how do I make sure that I know every dollar and I feel like I can control those dollars from going up, or if I need to remove some, I can control that without it being kind of out of my reach or out of my understanding. And so that really, I think, resonates very much with me as a CEO and someone that certainly oversees budgets in prior companies and now, but I think it is something that for CFOs, CEOs, and even the engineering leaders are very much accountable for their budgets, and having that sort of sense of visibility and control is really important.
No, that's fantastic. Okay, good information. And do you mind sharing? Like, you have a subscription type of model? Is that how do you usually structure it, or is that case by case or confidential?
No, great question, and that's the one I forgot to answer. So, the short story is it's set up as a subscription. It's a software as a service product with a annual payment structure, and we've tried to structure the way we bill for OpsCanvas so that it's going to have a very strong ROI, very easy to buy. It's not too expensive, even though it's delivering a lot of value, but that it's something that you feel like you just need to always have, that you don't want to go without. And so our whole thing is, how do we continue to deliver value to folks? And so If you're a smaller organization, we actually have a way within our pricing for that to work for an earlier stage company. If you're a large enterprise, we have it structured in a way that it can grow with you. I mean, we see oftentimes where a business unit or a division feels the pain the most maybe of this. And so they can start out, and then we have it structured so that we can add as the organization grows into it. And we really just, the way we structure our billing is how many accounts do you want to, scan and have kind of that full visibility on, and how many different products and pipelines do you have running? That's really all it is. It's a pretty kind of basic formula from that standpoint.
Makes a lot of sense. So I have one last question from you, and it's probably a big one. So where is this all going? Where do you see in 2-3 years? Because I used to have a longer time horizon when I asked this question, but things are changing so rapidly. So just in 2 or 3 years, what might be very different from how things are going down now?
Yeah, so I think in 2 or 3 years, certainly we all expect that AI is going to have a huge impact. Whether there's a bubble or not, I think there's going to be impact. And with what we're focused on is we feel like the problem that we're addressing is only going to get greater as AI gets more incorporated, because there's costs that will be incurred. Having a sense of where that goes, which business unit, which team, which product is all super important, as well as I want to make sure that these costs aren't going haywire. I mean, there's all sorts of different models. The most popular one right now is token-based pricing on large language models. And, for an enterprise, that can get very expensive. If a token is, five letters or whatever it is, you're going to wind up seeing that bill go through the roof. So you really want to make sure you've got visibility and a handle on it. I think more importantly for us, and what I've always been someone that feels like I want to help carve out new ways of thinking about problems, solving them, even new categories in the market. Where we see ourselves fitting is this is a new category. What we've built, our context and everything, we call it our core intelligence layer. And we think a core intelligence layer is going to be required for every organization running software in the cloud in the future. You're going to have that sort of context to be able to make good decisions, see everything that's running. What are you actually paying for? Yeah, I want to know that I'm paying for a database, but I don't really, as a CFO or CEO, want to know that I'm paying for a database. I want to know that I'm paying for a database that's powering my online store. That is a lot more helpful to me.
Yeah, they have further information. No, I can see that becoming very important in the years to come as AI becomes more and more of a cost. And really, I think everyone's being given the AI cost a little bit more grace right now, where they're willing to incur a little bit more costs in that. Sooner or later, they're going to start drilling down and say, how can we do this more efficiently? And I think that's when your product there has a lot of potential. So, yeah, Brian, thank you very much for coming on here. This has been very helpful, and I hope the listeners gained a lot of information that can be very useful.
Thanks, Wayne. It was great being on here, and look forward to continuing the conversation down the road.